We're talking about maps that were drawn roughly between the 1300s and the 1700s, called Piri Reis in the year 1513.
What makes this map so strange is that it shows features of the Earth that no one in 1513 could possibly have known. That single detail sparked a wave of speculation, from ideas about ancient civilizations to theories of lost knowledge. And for decades, scholars argued over its meaning without finding a convincing explanation. But in 2025, the mystery was finally unlocked. Scientists used AI to analyze every stroke, every coastline, and every handwritten note on the map, and the data they uncovered overturned everything we thought we knew. So what is the true nature of the Piri Reis map? The 1929 discovery. In 1929, while a group of workers were renovating the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, they opened an old wooden door that led into the royal archives. Inside, there was nothing but dust, scraps of paper, and forgotten objects from the Ottoman Empire. Yet, in the middle of that clutter, they pulled out a piece of gazelle skin covered with sharp, deliberate ink lines along its edge. No one knew what it was. But when scholars were called in, they immediately recognized what lay before them. It was a surviving fragment of the Piri Reis map, a document that would puzzle researchers for nearly a century. The man who drew it was Piri Reis, a famed Ottoman admiral who spent most of his life at sea and was obsessed with gathering every piece of geographical information he could find. He did not see the world only through the eyes of a sailor. He looked at it as someone trying to assemble a giant puzzle, one piece at a time. In his notes, he wrote that his 1513 map was compiled from more than 20 different sources. In other words, he brought together the knowledge of many cultures and placed it onto a single sheet of gazelle skin. What shocked researchers was not the number of sources he used or the confidence of his annotations. It was what appeared on the map itself. In 1513, Europeans had reached the Americas for only about 20 years. They were still exploring, still sketching rough outlines of lands they barely understood. Yet on the Piri Reis map, the eastern coast of South America appeared with a level of accuracy that made scholars double-check what they were looking at. The Amazon basin, an enormous geographical feature, was in the right place. Many Caribbean islands were drawn almost exactly as they appear on modern maps. Even the curve of South America was so clear that people wondered if he had somehow seen a map from the 20th century. The question was never simply that he drew it correctly. The real question was how? Where did the information come from? How could an Ottoman admiral, living on the opposite side of the world, possess data that Europeans would not fully gather until decades later? And why would a map drawn on gazelle skin, later forgotten in a dusty archive, contain details far beyond what the early 16th century should have allowed? All of these questions began the moment that fragment was lifted out of the dust in 1929. From that point on, it became the spark for a debate that would last almost 100 years, a debate about knowledge, about the origins of information, and about everything history may have lost along the way. The real explanation behind the strange accuracy. As the initial wave of excitement faded, scholars stopped asking how accurate the Piri Reis map was and began asking why it looked accurate in the first place. Once the surprise wore off, the map revealed something far more interesting. It was not drawn from a single source. It was the result of a bold and complex method of combining information that modern cartographers rarely consider. Piri Reis said he used more than 20 different maps, and at first this sounds like a simple statement. But in reality, it is the key to the entire mystery. Each source came from a different cartographic tradition. There were Portuguese charts, maps used by Columbus, Arabic maps, and the famous Portolan and Catalan nautical charts. More importantly, each type used a different way of projecting the world onto a flat surface. Ancient and medieval maps did not rely on modern latitude and longitude. They relied on sailing routes, wind directions, estimated distances, and the practical knowledge of captains. Because of that, every source carried its own distortions. Some stretched coastlines horizontally, others bent them at unusual angles. Some exaggerated the size of unknown lands. Yet when Piri Reis combined them, something unexpected happened. Many of these distortions canceled one another out, especially along the eastern coast of South America. Where a Portuguese chart leaned west, a Catalan chart leaned east. Where Columbus misjudged a distance, a Portolan chart corrected it in another direction. It was similar to placing two distorted mirrors together and finding that the overlap looks surprisingly straight. This is the true reason for the map's unusual accuracy. Not because Piri Reis possessed secret knowledge, and not because he had access to data centuries ahead of its time. Rather, he combined sources in a way that European cartographers of the period did not. While explorers in Iberia guarded their charts as military secrets, each holding a different version of the world, Piri Reis gathered them all and searched for the common shape hidden between conflicting sources. It was a flexible, intuitive method that produced a result that looked far more modern than the era should have allowed. It also explains why some parts of the map seem strikingly accurate, while others are severely distorted. The Piri Reis map is not a piece of knowledge preserved from a lost civilization. It is the product of a remarkable technique for synthesizing information, a technique that many European mapmakers at the time never attempted. The shadows of 16th century knowledge. If the accurate coastlines of South America made scholars curious, the lower part of the map gave them a completely different feeling. It felt impossible to explain. In the bottom corner of the gazelle's skin, Piri Reis drew a stretch of land that extended far to the south, complete with mountains, bays, and sharp shorelines as if he had seen them with his own eyes. The strange part was that in 1513, no one knew what lay to the south of the Americas. Europeans had only reached Brazil and parts of Argentina. Tierra del Fuego was still a mystery, yet this map showed a detailed southern land that tempted many to ask a question that sounded outrageous but seemed unavoidable. Could this be Antarctica? The idea seemed wild, but it did not appear from nowhere. Antarctica was officially discovered only in 1820, 3 centuries after this map was created. And humanity did not have a reasonably accurate picture of its coastline beneath the ice until the 1950s. Somehow, several outlines on the Piri Reis map looked like a version of Antarctica without ice, and that resemblance sparked decades of debate. Many wondered if Piri Reis had relied on a source that was far older, from a time when Antarctica might not yet have been covered in ice. But as modern scholars examined the map within the context of 16th century cartography, a very different picture began to appear. It was more grounded, but no less fascinating. At the time, mapmakers did not know how far South America extended. They often drew a southern continent out of habit. If there was a large landmass in the north, they balanced it with a landmass in the south. It was an aesthetic tradition, not science. Many Portuguese maps that Piri Reis almost certainly had access to were later lost due to disasters such as the fire at the Casa da India archives. When these documents disappeared, modern viewers were left with only the Ottoman map, which then looked as if it possessed secret knowledge, when in reality it was simply the surviving fragment of a much larger body of information. What made this even clearer was that the features people thought resembled Antarctica actually matched Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego, the southernmost regions of South America. They appeared stretched and rotated because of the way Piri Reis combined his sources. The mountains on the map were not drawn because he knew they existed, but because it was common in that era to use mountain symbols to mark unknown territory. The details that seemed too precise to be coincidence turned out to be the product of old visual conventions that modern readers easily misunderstand. The map does not tell us that Piri Reis knew Antarctica. It tells us that we have lost too many documents from the 16th century, and the gaps left behind make the surviving pieces look mysterious. The mystery is not on the map. It is in the missing information that history failed to preserve. And those empty spaces are exactly what turned the southern land into one of the longest-standing misunderstandings in the history of cartography: the mainstream view and the fringe perspective. When the Piri Reis map was presented to the public in 1931, it produced two completely different reactions. One came from mainstream scholars, including historians, cartographers, and maritime experts, who believed that the map was simply the result of skilled workmanship and the rich flow of information the Ottoman Empire collected. The other came from independent researchers who were drawn to its unusual details and believed that the map might be the remnant of an ancient body of knowledge that had disappeared. These two perspectives stood opposed to each other for decades. Mainstream scholars had a simple explanation. Reis himself said he used more than 20 maps, so it made perfect sense that his work appeared more detailed than most maps of the 16th century. They knew that the Ottoman Empire possessed a wide intelligence network throughout the Mediterranean and frequently seized charts from Spanish and Portuguese ships. Those two Iberian empires treated their New World discoveries as military secrets. Scholars also knew that Portolan and Catalan charts from the Mediterranean were famous for their coastal accuracy. From this perspective, the Piri Reis map was the natural result of access to good information, rather than knowledge that was ahead of its time. But this explanation never satisfied those who believed in the possibility of ancient knowledge. For them, details such as the sharp outline of eastern South America or the mysterious southern land seemed far too specific to be explained by combining different sources. They argued that Piri Reis must have used a much older line of information, perhaps from the Phoenicians, or from prehistoric civilizations, or from some lost map that no longer exists. Their arguments often relied on the feeling that the map looked too accurate for its age, and that feeling alone was strong enough to keep these ideas alive for many years. Yet both sides overlooked an important factor. The 16th century was filled with unofficial information networks. The Ottoman Empire did not rely only on diplomacy and trade to obtain Western maps. They also benefited from Mediterranean corsair fleets, groups that attacked Iberian ships and captured large numbers of nautical charts. Many of those documents vanished from Western history due to piracy or disasters like the fire at the Casa de India. But some of them survived in Ottoman holdings. This means Piri Reis may genuinely have seen maps that no longer exist today. Once this context is understood, the picture becomes far clearer. The Piri Reis map was not the product of mystical knowledge, but it was also not the accidental collage that some scholars describe. It existed between two extremes. It was born from a chaotic and cross-cultural exchange of information that moved across borders, across wars, and across the gaps in the historical record. And it is this intersection of scholarship, intelligence work, conflict, and lost documents that makes the Piri Reis map a mirror of a world we rarely imagine today. It shows a world where knowledge did not move in a straight line. It moved along winding, secretive paths that are now difficult to trace. The question is no longer whether the map is right or wrong. The real question is what information people were trading at the time, and how a single map ended up carrying traces of so many different civilizations. To answer that question, we have to move forward to the year 2025, when artificial intelligence finally made it possible to decode an ancient map in a way humanity had never achieved before: the application of AI. The way AI works in this context is surprisingly easy to imagine. Picture a system that is shown thousands of old maps and is then asked questions such as, which style does this coastline belong to, or does this line resemble Spanish work or Arabic work? A computer vision model measures the shapes of curves down to the millimeter and compares them with data so large that no human could ever process it. At the same time, a language model reads every note Piri Reis wrote in Old Turkish and Arabic, translates and aligns them, and determines what kind of knowledge they reflect in the early 16th century. A statistical module then evaluates probabilities. It checks whether a particular feature fits the Catalan tradition, whether another detail matches Columbus, or whether a coastline reflects real geography or simply the assumptions of its time. What amazed researchers was not only the results, but the clarity with which AI presented them. For the first time, they could see the mixed origins of the map, not through guesswork or intuition, but through visible evidence. AI highlighted stretches of coastline that aligned with the Mediterranean Portolan tradition, sections that carried the drawing habits and signature errors of Columbus, and details that matched Portuguese charts from the years 1500 to 1512. It was as if the map from 1513 began to tell its own story about how it was assembled. More importantly, AI allowed researchers to separate the map into layers and identify exactly which sources Piri Reis used for each part. Instead of a chaotic blend of information, the map gradually appeared as a structure that was complex yet coherent. Every coastline, every island, and every symbol carried its own lineage of information. This level of transparency finally explained what had puzzled both scholars and the public for nearly a century. The map's strange accuracy was not a miracle. It was the result of combining many different projection styles in a way that made the errors of one source cancel the errors of another. For those who favored mysterious interpretations, this was a disappointing outcome. But for researchers, it was a breakthrough. For the first time, they had a tool powerful enough to say that the map did not require a prehistoric civilization to make sense. It required only a correct understanding of how Renaissance knowledge was carried from place to place. Under the lens of AI, the Piri race map stopped being an impossible puzzle. It became evidence of how complicated the 16th century world truly was, a world in which empires competed for information. Maps were treated like weapons, and knowledge traveled through the hands of scholars, sailors, merchants, and even pirates. What the Piri race map really shows? Once AI completed the process of unmixing the layers of the map, the answer that researchers had waited for finally appeared. The southern land, the feature that fueled almost a century of controversy, was not Antarctica. It was not a trace of a forgotten civilization. It was not the remnant of a map thousands of years older than the Renaissance. AI demonstrated that every detail once considered too accurate or too advanced came from something far more human, the overlapping distortions of many projection styles, combined with the way 16th century mapmakers tried to compress the world onto a small piece of gazelle skin. When the AI compared each coastline to modern geography, it found that the mysterious land matched Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego. The shapes aligned once the distortions were corrected. Piri Reis was not drawing Antarctica. He was illustrating the end of South America in the way people of his time usually did when they were unsure how far a continent extended. The mountains marked unknown territory. The curves were exaggerated according to Portolan habits. The distortions of Spanish, Portuguese, Catalan, and Arabic sources piled on top of one another and created an illusion that later generations misunderstood as evidence of Antarctica. Even more important, AI confirmed something many scholars had long suspected but could never prove. The Piri race map reflects a complex information network that existed during the Age of Exploration. Sections that matched Portuguese data from 1500 to 1512 show that Piri Reis had access to highly advanced nautical charts, many of which have disappeared due to fires, wars, or simple neglect. The features that once made the map look supernatural were actually the surviving fragments of a larger knowledge system that time has erased. This realization is what makes the AI discovery significant. It forces us to rethink the Renaissance world not as a set of isolated empires, but as a place where information crossed borders much faster than textbooks suggest. Maritime intelligence, map trading, and even piracy all contributed to hybrid works like the Piri race map. Instead of being a remnant of a prehistoric civilization, the map reveals how people of the time collaborated and competed in a global race for knowledge. Viewed through this lens, the mystery of the Piri race map was never about it being too correct. The real mystery is how modern readers misunderstood it for so long. Missing documents, modern assumptions, and our tendency to seek out the extraordinary all pushed the map into the realm of myth. AI did not just provide an explanation, it brought the entire debate back to reality, placing the map in its proper context and revealing how knowledge was built, copied, reshaped, and passed down through generations. In the end, the Piri race map is not evidence of something impossible. It is evidence of the opposite. Human knowledge has always been more complex than history records, and what disappears over time often makes us believe there is a mystery where none exists. Thanks to AI, for the first time in almost a century, we can see the map for what it truly is: a sophisticated creation of the Renaissance, rather than a doorway to a lost world.